Every server, including local environments and live hosting servers on the internet, works a little bit differently. And so this is an example of how WordPress could be installed manually using Local by Flywheel. Coming up in this chapter, I'll show you how I installed WordPress manually using another local environment called MAMP, but you should follow along in whichever environment you have. You can refer back to this video later or follow along now. And in doing this, you'll get a feel for how WordPress works and the way it connects the core files to the database. Let's go. Now, I'm going to create a new WordPress installation in Local by Flywheel, and I suggest you do the same. So I'm going to go ahead and log out of my practice site 1, close the tabs, and I'm going to close that tab as well in my browser. And I'm going to go back to Local by Flywheel, and just so that I don't work on this site instead, I'm going to turn this site off. So practice site 1 is now turned off. And I have a second one called Practice Site 2 that I've just installed using the plus button over here. And I did a very default installation with no changes at all. And I called it Practice Site 2. So stop the video if you like and hit the plus sign and set up a second site that we're going to do a manual installation on. Or you can just follow along here. The reason I use Local by Flywheel to create the installation first and then go ahead and change it so that I can use that environment to install WordPress manually is because it's just convenient. Local by Flywheel sets up the config file so that it's already connected to the database. That way, when we install WordPress manually, we know that all the credentials are correct. Now, let's first take a look at the file structure for this Practice Site 2. I'm going to open File Explorer again, and I'll go back to my Local Sites folder in my username under Users on the main hard drive, and I'll find Practice Site 2, and under the App folder and the Public folder, you can see that these are the files that are the WordPress core files. And like I mentioned in the last video, if we go to wordpress.org and we download this zip file and then unzip it, these are the exact files that we'll end up with from that zip file, with the exception of the wp-config file that was created from the sample. Let's open the wp-config-sample.php file in a text or a code editor. Now I have it open in my Atom code editor right here, and you can see that it's just got some default data for the database name and the username and the password and what the host name is, which by default might be localhost. Now compare that to if I go back into the file structure and I open that wp-config.php file. This file has been created by WordPress when Local by Flywheel installed it. So you can see the difference. The database name is local, and the username is root, the password is root, and the host name is localhost. And also, there are some salts or unique keys and phrases down here that we will set up in a later video when we do a manual installation in the next section. That's just to show you what you would get if you downloaded WordPress from wordpress.org. Instead of just downloading this and replacing it inside of my file structure, I'm just going to make the assumption that this is the file, these are the same files, and the wp-config.php file is already set up for this server. However, the main change that we're going to make so that we can go through the WordPress installation process, that manual installation process, is that we're going to delete the database tables out of that database. As we did in the last video, click the Database tab here and click Adminer for this website. Now you can make sure you're in the right website up in the address bar of your browser. This one is my practice site 2.local. And so I know I'm in the right database. And what I'm going to do is look at all these database tables. There's 12 in total. And I'm going to click the checkbox at the top left, which selects all those database tables. And then after that, I'm going to come down here and click drop. When I click drop, it gives me a window that says, are you sure? Because this is going to delete all the tables out of the database, but it's going to leave the database intact. We're just erasing an existing database. So I'll hit OK. And now the message in adminer tells me, okay, well, in this database, there are no tables. So how are we going to get the tables back and get this working? If I go right now to local by flywheel with the empty database, and I click, say, view site, when I click view site, here we go. Now the WordPress files are in place, and the WordPress WP config file is correct. It's actually communicating with the database correctly. The reason I know that is because this is the first step of setting up WordPress manually. So now I'm going to go through this process, which is a script they used to call the famous 5-minute WordPress install process. Now, so many hosts and local environments install WordPress automatically that you may not have to go through this process very often. But choose your language and click continue. And now, since we're already connected to the database, it just needs a little bit of information about what the WordPress site is going to entail. It's going to create the first user, and we'll choose our password as well. And this is the welcome message. Welcome to the famous 5-minute WordPress installation process. And so let's see. I'm going to call this practice site 2 so I can know which one it is. I'll use my standard username. And then I'm going to choose a password that I know I'll be able to remember. It doesn't have to be that difficult or that strong of a password, since this isn't a public-facing website. Nobody can access this on the web. And then there needs to be an email address. For each user account. And then you can choose discourage search engine visibility. If you are on a live server, you might do that in order to develop the site or hide it behind a maintenance screen. In either case, you don't need to check that box. And I'll click Install WordPress. And I can save that username and password again. And that was it. Success. WordPress has been installed. So I can click the login button, which brings me to that standard login page. Log in with the username and password that I had the browser remember. And here we are, practice site 2. And I can right-click visit site and open that in a new tab. And I have my standard default fresh and clean WordPress installation ready to go. Now let's take a look at the database that's still open. And let's just refresh the page. And you can see that all the database tables are back. Let's just verify under WP options, and I'll hit select data. Yeah, there's the URL, practicesite2.local, the same URL that I have up here. And so that worked for me. The quick WordPress 5-minute installation process, and that's how we do it. In the next sections, you'll see that I teach you how to install WordPress manually using the MAMP local development environment. And I've added this local by flywheel system in ahead of that because I find that it's much easier and it loads and works faster on my browser than MAMP does. But follow along if you like. You can continue to use local by flywheel instead of MAMP. And in the next sections, take what you need out of the video lessons. In this lesson, I showed you how you can use local by flywheel to experiment with installing WordPress manually. It's a good exercise just to get familiar with how WordPress works to connect the files to the database. In the future, you can feel free to rely on auto installers in local or at your hosting company to install WordPress automatically. In the next video, we'll explore different types of hosting environments for WordPress, including another local development environment called MAMP. If local by flywheel is working well for you, feel free to just follow along with the MAMP lessons, but keep using local instead. A great way to play with WordPress for your coursework and for building WordPress sites is to install a server on your local computer and use it directly. In a previous video, I introduced several free options that make it easy to install WordPress locally. In this video, you'll use the free program called MAMP to install a local server on your computer and create a local environment for website development. Then, you'll learn how to install WordPress manually. Because everyone's computer is different, setting up a server on yours may require a slightly different setup. By going through the manual install process, you'll learn about how WordPress works, between its file structure and connection to a database, which is an invaluable skill for a WordPress expert. Let's get started. Let's start by opening your browser and navigating to mamp.info. You'll see the MAMP homepage and a free download button, or downloads, at the top right. If you open that free download button, it'll ask you whether you want to download the Apple, Mac version, or the Windows version. Just click the appropriate version for you and click Save File. Then once you've saved that file, you can move it or leave it in your Downloads folder and double-click the exe file to install it like you would any other program. When I open MAMP, it starts the servers automatically. And so you should see either a Start Servers or Stop Servers button here at the right. And if the two green boxes are lit under Apache Server and MySQL Server, then MAMP is running and ready to go. If not, click the Start Servers button here on the right and wait for both boxes to be lit. Next, click Open Start Page in the MAMP control panel. That should open a new tab in your browser with the address localhost and something after. Now if it's plain localhost, then MAMP is using the standard port 80 for the Apache port, and it doesn't need a reference to the port number in the address here. Now you may see an address that looks like localhost : and a 4-digit number. If that's the case, then your computer has defined a different port for the Apache port so that MAMP will work. Often programs are already using port 80, which is the standard port, and programs, for example, like Skype, will sometimes do that. Mine is using port 80, so my address is localhost/MAMP for the start page. Now, within the start page, we also have a reference to another port number down here under MySQL. That is the database port, and in my case, it's 3306. Open MAMP now, and at the left side, click the Preferences button, and you have a number of tabs across the top. If you click Ports, you'll see which Apache port and MySQL port that MAMP is using in your case. We'll address and use these port numbers when we're setting up to install WordPress. Now that we have a working server environment, proven by the fact that we can navigate to a localhost address like the MAMP start page, let's now open a new tab and open wordpress.org. Now this is the self-hosted version of WordPress that we can download from this Get WordPress button and then download the latest version. I'm going to save that on my computer. It'll be in my Downloads folder, and then I'll have you do the same thing and we'll unzip it and take a look at the files. In the File Explorer for Windows, or using a Mac in the Finder, I'm going to create a folder inside my WordPress folder on my computer, and I'll just call that WordPress 498, just a place to keep this version of WordPress. And I'm going to drag the download zip file right into that folder. Now it's on my computer, and in Windows I can right click and click Extract All to unzip or uncompress that zip file. And if you're on a Mac, use the Finder to just double click it and you can unzip that zip file. Now, depending on how your computer unzipped that compressed file, inside of the folder it created, there may be another folder called WordPress. Now, inside of that folder, we're trying to get to the root core files for the WordPress software. And that's about 19 folders and files that look just like this. These are the WordPress core files that I want to place in my server area that MAMP has created for me. Now, on your regular hard drive, in my case it's C:, basically the same location on Windows or a Mac, there should be a folder called MAMP. Now on a Mac, sometimes it's in the Applications folder. You can open up the MAMP folder, and inside there are a number of configuration files and folders. And the main folder that houses your files is called htdocs. So I'll double-click htdocs, and in my installation I already have a few site folders created. But what you should do is create a new folder inside of htdocs and label it for your next site. I'm going to label mine WP Dev Course 2, just so I can keep track of it. Open up that folder, and then I'm going to select all of the WordPress core files that I just downloaded, and I'm going to copy them directly into that folder. I copied them because I want to maintain the original folders I downloaded inside of my WordPress files. Then I could use them in other places as well. Now that I have my WordPress core files inside the htdocs and my site folder, I just need to configure the database using the MAMP tools. The way WordPress works, we're going to create a wp-config file from this sample file that's provided in the core files, and we're going to place the database credentials in that file. First, let's open up MAMP and go to the start page again in our browser. We can go down and click PHP My Admin. That is a database manager that will open in a tab in your browser and show you what databases are already in your MAMP installation. If you're just starting out, you may not have any. But what you can do is click the New button at the top left, or if you're under the Databases tab, there's a Create Database field right here at the top. So I'm going to name my database the same name as my site folder, and I'm just going to add a -db onto the database name. If I hit Create, that will create a database, and you can see a message, there's no tables found in the database. It's basically an empty database, and we're going to allow the WordPress software to fill it up with tables and rows. Now there's one thing to take note of here, and that is what port number is the MySQL or database port in your MAMP installation. In my case, it's 3306, as I can see here at the top. Now on your MAMP start page, it also shows you that port number here under the MySQL heading on the start page. And another place you can find it is in MAMP under Preferences under the Ports tab here. The MySQL database is 3306 in my case. You'll just need to remember that in order to put the correct database credentials in the WP config file in your WordPress files. All the database credentials can be seen here. With MAMP, the host is always localhost, and it may reference the port number right here. And then the user and the password are both root. You would never use a root for a username and password on a live site, but because it's a local installation, it doesn't have public access. The next thing to do is to either rename or make a copy of the wp-config-sample file that you copied over into your site folder in MAMP's htdocs. What I'm going to do is just click twice in the file name and just delete the -sample, rendering this file the correct file name, wp-config.php. Now I'm going to open that within my code or text editor. In my case, it's Adam, and it's opened the file, which has a bit of code necessary for WordPress to work. And this is the file that tells WordPress where to look for the database so that it can enter and control all the content and information that the WordPress website will use. So you can see here, a little bit down from the top, there's 4 different fields to fill in. So we know the database name we've chosen. Doesn't matter what it is, it just has to be the correct name when you chose and created that database in PHP My Admin. And the username, as we just reviewed, is root for MAMP, and the password is always root for MAMP, as well as the DB host. Now, here's an example where, in my case, I remember the local host is in port 3306. So I need to change this from a standard localhost to localhost colon 3306. Now I can just click File, Save, or Control S to save that file. And now I'm finished with my configuration, and I can allow WordPress to install itself inside of my MAMP server. Now remember, I know that the working URL for my MAMP installation is localhost/something. And so I'm going to open a new tab in my browser. And this time I'm going to reference the folder name that I created for my site. Now when I navigate to that web address, if it's working correctly, I should see a WordPress installation screen. Now I can choose the language that I want to install WordPress with and then click Continue. And if it's communicating to the database correctly, all it needs is a title, username and password, and email, and it will set up WordPress correctly. If you didn't set the WP config file up correctly and it can't see the database, then it may actually be asking you for database information here. And it's okay to install WordPress and allow the script to create the WP config file for you. But I wanted to show you how to do it manually so you know where all the information is held. So let's choose a site title, WP Dev Course 2, for my example, and your username and password can be anything you like. I like to choose a password that I can remember. It doesn't need to be that secure since this is a local installation. And then you can choose an email. Just click Install WordPress, and you should get a success message in just a moment. There you go. There's a login button, and you need to remember the password that you chose. And when you log in, you should be welcomed with the nice welcome dashboard screen showing that your site is working. Congratulations! Now, depending on which version of WordPress you've installed, your welcome screen might look slightly different. Either way, always download and install the latest version of WordPress for security reasons and to get the most features. You can roll over the name of your site at the top and click Visit Site. I like to right-click and open it in a new tab. You can take a look at what your new site looks like. Great! In this video, you installed MAMP on your local computer, set up a database, edited the wp-config.php file, and installed WordPress. Now you can play around with creating WordPress websites without any need for an internet connection, totally in private as much as you want. Next, we'll explore the inner workings of your new local WordPress installation to get to know how everything works together. See you there!